Blog Talk Radio.
Welcome to the Institute for Personal Development, Kriya Yoga Ashram, where total consciousness is the new frontier.
Kriya Yoga is union of the individual with the divine. Join us as we explore the practices to initiate this process.
Good morning. Welcome to the Voice of Yoga. Let's talk consciousness. I am your hostess, Lisa Winton, and with me is Kenny Toy, also known as Swami Jayananda, founder of the Institute for Personal Development, that's located here in Hampton, New Hampshire. Good morning, Swami. Thank you for being here today. How are you?
Good morning. I'm doing pretty good today. How about you?
Well, I'm doing great today, too. Thanks for asking. And we want to thank you all for tuning in. Today on the Voice of Yoga, we will talk about goodness as a divine quality, which is the only truth in reality. Listen as we discuss this biblical quote, Mark 10:27. And Jesus, looking upon them, saith, With men it is impossible, but not with God. For with God all things are possible. In this show, Swami will explain some of the ways the collective human consensus obscures the presence of the perfect divine creation. A new look at the old saying, if it is too good to be true, it probably is, but in truth, it isn't. In fact, it can't be anything less than perfect. Welcome to the Voice of Yoga. We are talking consciousness. Join the Kriya Yoga Spiritual Advance to get the light in your soul and experience truth as absolute goodness. Swami, today's title of the show is Too Good to Be True. Can you tell us what inspired you to do a show with that particular saying?
Well, I think it was that saying we have in the opening, if it's too good to be true, which is something that most of us, we're very doubtful about it. We're not living our lives from the understanding life can't be anything less than perfect. It's 180 degrees from where we're socialized, and we're completely unconscious to the divine creative principle, the divine idea that is running a perfect universe right here, right now, because we're really not taught how to look for it. It reminds me of the principles of mathematics are perfect, but for me to say my checkbook is perfect because the principles of mathematics are perfect might not prove to be true. In a very similar way, the divine creative principle is perfect. But unless I know the divine creative principle and I know how to apply it, which would be a very similar thing that you would do with the principles of mathematics to keep your checkbook in balance. A lot of what we do here now is to learn the divine creative principle, learn divine science, and apply it in order to enhance this living experience.
I know that saying, if it's too good to be true, it probably is. Or it has always struck me as being kind of a negative thing to say, like people don't expect things to be good or to be perfect.
And that's what we're learning here, is that you want to expect perfection. In fact, you want to know that is all that is going to be true. And that's what we talked about last week, that we can only know truth. You can only know 2 times 2 is 4. If for you 2 times 2 is 5 or 6, you can believe that, but you can't know it because it's not backed by the principle. And so the divine law of life is the only law of life. And we can believe that it's not there, or we could be ignorant of it functioning in reality, but we can't know that it's not there because it's there.
Well, someone may want to know, well, why can't it be anything less than perfect?
Because spirit is the only power in this universe. To understand life from the perspective of the one divine life is the only truth of being. When we drop into the belief in 2 powers, now we're not in truth. We're in a false sense of existence. And from that perspective, we're under the law of karma. Material law. What we put out is what we get back. But once we come out of the mind that is manufacturing this false sense of existence, we rise into the one, the unified state, where the perfection of being is running a perfect universe. And so we can accept the finite mortal appearance, and we can believe that it's real, but it's not backed by the creative principle. It's not self-existent. It's really relying on your belief in it in order to give it the appearance of power.
Well, Swami, if we could start talking about some of the ways the collective human consensus obscures the presence of the perfect divine creation. So what do we mean by that sentence?
Here we're talking about all of the human concepts, theories, and beliefs that aren't really backed by divine law. Things that people have come to conclusions and formed opinions about information because it came through their corporeal senses. Now, the information that's coming through the corporeal senses is human conjecture. You're not dealing with the truth, you're dealing with a concept about the truth, because the minute something is manifested, the minute something appears to our corporeal senses, it had to have split from unity, manifested in half and left behind a complementary, unmanifested other part. And if we are working with only half of the information, you can't really come to an accurate conclusion. That's human conjecture. That's what we're trying to do.
So then you're talking about that it obscures the presence of the perfect divine creation. Does that mean when we have these concepts and beliefs, we no longer have our attention for this perfect divine creation?
Yeah, and I think in a lot of ways, it also hinders us from moving beyond what it is that we're accepting. And so we get complacent. We lose our motivation when we are inspired from within that there is a greater, a larger sense of life beyond what is appearing in my corporeal senses. It may inspire you to go beyond what's safe, familiar, comfortable, and known. But if we get bogged down with these human theories and concepts and beliefs that you have to wait until you expire before you can get your reward in heaven, then it may leave you a little unmotivated. And so these are some of the complications that I think we're dealing with today.
Well, let's talk about the Bible verse that we have, Mark 10:27. This might be an answer for what you just talked about. And I'll read it. And Jesus, looking upon them, saith, with men it is impossible, but not with God. For with God all things are possible.
Right. And how many of us really believe with God all things are possible? Most of us think everything is impossible and that nothing is perfect. And so we've been poisoned with these theories and opinions and concepts. But in truth, none of them are backed by the divine creative principle. And in the Bible, Jesus says in Matthew 5:48, be ye therefore perfect, even as your Father which is in heaven is perfect. Perfect is a word that means whole. In Sanskrit, the term is purna, when you are whole. And the only way that we can experience wholeness is if we get out of the manifested or the complementary unmanifested dimensions of reality into the spiritual truth of being. So by assuming spiritual identity, we now rise into the understanding of the one life. And in that oneness, there's no opposition, there's no conflict, and it is in reference to Mary Baker Eddy when they said it was her revelation of divine egoism. There is but one life looking at itself, as itself, of itself, and to itself. Everything is within your consciousness. within that one experience. Now, from that level of understanding, the commandments are doable. To love God with your heart, your soul, and your mind. Well, if you are a finite mortal being thinking about an eternal spiritual being, there's no union. But if you can ask in my name, which is what the Bible says, in my likeness, if you can assume your true identity as spirit, as whole, complete, now you've opened the channels of communication to this perfection of being.
So if you could just clarify for me, so if I'm having a good day, and already I realize that's a human judgment on my idea of what a good day is, but if I'm having a good day and I thank the Father in heaven for my having a good day, how do I know it was from the Father in heaven and not just world thought or the universe just clicking in with the wavelength that my thoughts are on?
Having a good day, I think, is good feedback. If you have a bad day, then at least you know with a bad day that it could not be under the jurisdiction of divine law. But like you say, it could be a good day simply because of good karma and not being conscious of the divine creative principle. So we work with that. We can always get a temporary sense of success with a mind that is still working out of our 5 corporeal senses. But to get permanent success, we really have to be conscious of the divine creative principle. And then the more conscious we are of the perfection of being, the more the perfection of being will be externalized as our experiences.
So how do you recommend I do that throughout the day, just to make sure that my consciousness is in tune or attuned with this divine principle?
The divine creative principle is found before thought and above corporeal sense. So we really want to stop thinking, forming thoughts and opinions based on the information that's coming through our corporeal senses, and then just make your mind an avenue of awareness for the divine creative principle. The invisible, intangible, divine omnipresence doesn't report in your 5 corporeal senses. Now, as you start to shut off the input that's coming through your corporeal senses, you begin to activate your spiritual senses, starting to perceive things through spiritual sense. The term in the Bible is called the Christ. The Christ is what makes the divine creative principle or the divine creation comprehensive to human consciousness. And as this spiritual light begins to dawn on you through your spiritual senses, then without trying, striving, or competing with it, you let it guide you. And more you will learn to trust what was at one time invisible and intangible. And as this spiritual light illuminates your consciousness, then now you're working with a demonstrable principle. But you're not thinking the way that you normally would. You are now working, rather than with thoughts, you're working with the divine creative idea.
Is that time to hear a word from our sponsor? So listeners, we'll be back with you in just a few moments. Kriya Yoga Theory 2 is a unique and revolutionary practice and forum designed to facilitate the growth process in human development. Apotheosis is a real experience and has an evidence procedure. You cannot lead someone to permanent change by doing for them what they must do themselves. Personal accountability and responsibility are the foundation of Kriya Yoga Theory 2. You must be engaged and devoted. Prana power brings virtue to overcome fear, wisdom to overcome ignorance, purpose to overcome selfishness, enthusiasm to overcome laziness. Kriya Yoga is a path of action, knowledge, and devotion. These sessions are a celestial positioning system to guide the individual into union with the divine. For more information or to sign up for your next session online, go to www.ipdtransform.com. Namaste. Welcome back. For those of you just joining us, you're listening to The Voice of Yoga, and we are talking consciousness. So, Swami, some people may not have even heard of this idea of divine perfection. So how would we explain to them how to grasp that idea?
I think the first thing you have to come to, the understanding, the mind that we have accepted to get us through this lifetime can't bring forth the divine image. In order for us to try and grasp the idea of divine perfection, we start to make human thought buoyant by filling our thought with divine ideas, the fruits of the Spirit, peace, love, goodness, gentleness, kindness, faithfulness, patience, temperance. These types of tangible things that have divine quality. What that does is it makes thought buoyant to rise above the swirling variations of duality, driven by a belief in two powers. Living in awareness of spiritual truth, being a faithful witness to become a conduit to let truth reveal itself by resolving things into thoughts and exchanging the objects of sense for the divine idea. For me, it kind of reminds me of if you were going to siphon liquid out of a container and you had a hose, the things that you would need would be the container that you were taking the liquid out of would have to be above the one that you were bringing the liquid into. But you would have to fill that hose with the liquid. And so we know the divine idea is above corporeal sense. But we have to fill our thought with divine idea in order to start to siphon that truth into our experience.
So let's dig a bit deeper when you say to become this conduit to let truth reveal itself by resolving things into thoughts. So what exactly does that mean?
In order to really grasp this, I really think you can turn to science for that, because science is telling us what we're calling reality is observation dependent. There really aren't things. Everything is a mental image. And it is the observer that sets the measurement for what they call the collapse of the wave function. So when Einstein was on the planet, they thought when you weren't looking at things that they were there. Well, now science has changed and they're starting to say what we're calling reality is observation dependent. And how we think is what we become. But if we are thinking with a 5-sense mortal mind and we're working with the human conjecture, the duality that is coming in through our corporeal senses, then we're limited to what we can externalize. But if we can think with divine mind, if we can stop forming thoughts and opinions based on the information coming through our corporeal senses, and we let the divine creative principle express itself through us, like we were saying, we have to find that place where my thought is the same as the divine idea, which is going to be before thought and above corporeal sense. Then in silence and in stillness, we watch and we wait, because resolving things into thoughts is what we're doing anyway. But the key here is the exchanging of the objects of sense for the divine idea. That's the big difference. Most of us are accustomed to unconsciously accepting what is appearing in our corporeal senses. We educate ourselves and we realize consciousness is experience, that whatever is appearing in my corporeal senses is really what I'm conscious of. And so the more conscious I am of the divine creation, then the more harmonious and indestructible will what is appearing in my corporeal senses reveal itself to be.
I think we have also some information, a writing from Mary Baker Eddy that could give us some more insight into what she believes thought is about.
Yeah, I have some of that right here. I'll just read a couple of paragraphs from it and we can unbox it as we go along. It seemed a wonderful thing when advanced thinkers began to perceive certain mental laws and to apply them to the healing of the body. This mental teaching is that man is the builder or creator of his body, that he builds or forms his body through his own thought, that he can change his body by his thought, and therefore that if he has built a sick body by wrong thinking or ignorant thinking, he can build a well body by right thinking, that by his ignorant, inharmonious thought he prevents God from manifesting, and by his true and harmonious thought he brings God into manifestation. Of course, this is a great advance over the old drug system, but it doesn't go far enough to satisfy the one who wishes the whole truth and nothing but the truth. It makes the body a battleground for opposing and contending forces, wrong thinking tearing down, right thinking building up, wrong thinking creating disease, right thinking destroying disease, and bringing in healthy conditions. For this teaching deals only with the changing conditions of the personal mentality, and not with the changeless state of being, the changeless mind, the omnipresence. It is better than the old way, but it is a hard way, a way of constant battle between good and evil, of hard work and doubtful results because it deals with two powers instead of one.
So, Swami, is she saying that we shouldn't be using our minds in a way for this, like, positive thinking? That's really not what's going to help us.
Well, I think what she's really saying, doing positive thinking, working with thought and belief, is better than just trying to do things without that mental aspect. But she's also saying there is a better way. There is a better way of thinking than forming thoughts and opinions based on the information that's coming through our 5 material senses. And then she's talking about the changeless state of being. She's talking about the divine idea, and that if we actually stop thinking and we let this word of God express itself through us, then it does the work. We would live by grace then, and we wouldn't have to be trying, striving, and struggling, because if I read a little bit further, she'll explain it. Here's what she says. Practically all metaphysical teachers agree that there is one presence, therefore one power. But they balk at the next step, which is that one power must mean one activity. Omnipresence means the full presence of God as all, that God is everywhere, all the time. It means that God and his activity is all there is, not only of the invisible, but of the visible, not only of the formless, but of the formed. Therefore, it must follow that the formed is as perfect as the formless. The manifest is as perfect as the unmanifest. For since there is but one unchanging creator, one activity, one power, one perfect mind bringing forth its own perfect substance, it logically follows that all form is changeless and eternally perfect. The body is God incarnate, God created and formed. It is God, come forth within himself and of himself. And man's beliefs, opinions, and mental concepts are not making God manifest, nor are they hindering or preventing that manifestation. Man does not create anything. He only sees that which eternally is, which is God manifest, and calls it good or evil according to his own development. Paul tells us not that we are sufficient of ourselves to think anything as of ourselves, but our sufficiency is of God. Our sufficiency to think is of God. Our ability to form thoughts and opinions is of our own ignorance, our belief in duality. But our power or sufficiency to think is when we think with God as God. From this basis, then, we see that man's wrong or ignorant beliefs and opinions and misinterpretations do not create or produce conditions in the body or in God's substance anywhere. Wrong thinking, which is really mental chaos and confusion itself, has no power to create. It does not create conditions of disease. The wrong thinking itself, the mental confusion and chaos itself, is the condition. For the condition is wholly and entirely of that personal mentality.
Isn't that what we talked about earlier when we were talking about if it is too good to be true, it probably is, because we're putting a condition on it. We're using our own beliefs and concepts and applying that to what we think is good and what should be true.
Right. We're looking at our thought about what's really here, and whatever it is that you think you're looking at is going to be good or bad based on your level of consciousness. And what we're saying is that if we were conscious of the divine idea, if we had awareness of that spiritual presence, then it would have to correct our thought. And it would have to externalize as what would appear to corporeal sense as a correction, a healing, or a miracle.
So what do you recommend that we do throughout the day to make sure that we are thinking right?
Well, I really like what it says in the Yoga Sutras: constant practice of detachment, continuous restraint of the thought variations, stopping thinking, and having awareness for the divine creation, the divine idea. And even though it's invisible and intangible to corporeal sense, as you start to cultivate your spiritual senses, this spiritual light will start to illuminate your thought. And what seemed like nothing before will turn out to be solution to any problems that you're experiencing.
Well, that sounds like some good steps for us to do to have this faith in the divine creation.
And eventually we want to understand the difference between belief and faith, because the value of faith in the divine creation and how to begin, like we had read from Matthew 5:48, "Be ye therefore perfect, even as your Father which is in heaven is perfect." If we start with the divine idea, if we start with the perfection of being, and we know that it is a principle, it's a law, it is a self-existent power, and we have fidelity to it, then it will start to prove its presence by revealing itself as our experiences.
Well, we do have to start breaking down our show for today, so listeners, be sure to visit the website, www.ipdtransform.com. Once you're on the homepage and you see the fading banner Blog Talk Radio, click that. That directs you to the Blog Talk Radio show catalog page. And then also by clicking on the Products tab and Online Classes, that directs you to all the classes that Swami has available. So with that, Swami, any final thoughts about today's show?
Well, I would like to encourage people to join the Kriya Yoga Spiritual Advance to get the light in your soul and experience truth as absolute goodness. Namaste.
And thank you for listening to our program, The Voice of Yoga. This is Lisa Winton along with Swami Jayananda signing off. Have a wonderful Kriya Yoga kind of day. Namaste.